supposed to be like that? It's been a while since I've done a video like this, so I'm starting on this new piece. It's the biggest watercolor I've ever done on wood. But while making this piece, and I'll explain the concept of this piece that inspired, me thinking about these things, and this video was about our inner critic. And I think at some point everyone who makes things has this inner critic, whether that comes from someone actually external and then we internalize that, or, just over the years we've, created enough or been in the creative space enough that we have a lot of self-doubt. What I've learned in my practice about what helps with addressing the inner critic, because mine is very severe. She's really mean. But she has a purpose, and I'll get into that later. But first I want to talk about this piece, where it came from. I stand up. It's about on my shoulder. You can't really see. My partner just stole it from the wood shop scrap. And someone left it this big ass piece. At first I was going to mount watercolor paper on this and gesso it on there. But my big roll, I don't have enough of it. So I was trying to look up, is there a way to just paint directly on wood with watercolor? And when I look it up, people have done it before, but they say the water seeps into the wood. You just want to be careful with rotting. I sanded it all down, and then I took it outside and sanded it all down, going to a really fine grit, and then there was a hole, so I filled it with some wood filler. It's kind of discolored, but I'm kind of trying to lean into that with the design. And then I sanded it, and then I put some varnish on it, so some acrylic matte varnish all over, a couple coats, just to seal in the wood. Even the back and the sides all have it too. And then I put watercolor ground. I'm just doing the sketch and now the inking for it. So we'll see what happens. I plan to use watercolor and gouache on it. Approaching this piece, I was really hesitant. This was when my inner critic was coming out a lot, and it has made me think about this topic a lot and wrestle with this problem, because in my mind I was this is a huge piece. This is a nice piece of plywood. You don't want to waste it. And I was just putting all this pressure on myself to get it right. Whatever I put on this, it has to be amazing, show-stopping, whatever. But then that caused me just to not want to work on it. I would actively avoid it, and then I would also avoid doing sketches on it. Even if I wasn't touching the wood, I just was scared to just mess it up somehow. And so then the topic and the concept of the image that I create on here has to do with my inner critic. So I think I might want to move this. Let's see. Oh my god. Now I look pale. You know what? This is kind of better. So the concept for this piece, it started with me thinking about why am I so mean to myself in my art? But it has to do a lot with my art. When I go to sit down and do art, I would just be very judgmental, and I would always when I look up references, and I've actually tried to make a point actually not to use Pinterest as much unless I have a certain image reference or pose or object that I want to use as a reference, not to try to look so much on Pinterest. Maybe at the beginning if I know what kind of style, mood, or new genre I want to try. But it would start with I would go into Pinterest and just see other people's stuff and want to do something like that. And then when I try to do it, it doesn't look like their stuff. And obviously it's not going to look like their stuff because it's not mine. And I would just get really mean to myself and think oh, that's no good. Every line I would make, I can just feel this presence in the back of my head, and almost another person in me. It's they're standing right next to me looking over at my paper that that's no good. That's never going to get you into a gallery. No one's going to want to see this stuff. All manner of things. And that just made me not want to work on my art anymore. So that's when my friend put me onto this book called No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz, I believe. And he talks about the idea of IFS, internal family systems, and he's a therapist. This is not to say that I'm a therapist, I know what I'm talking about, and what could work for me could not work for you. So that's just a preface, and I'm just recommending this book as something that has tremendously helped me in addressing my inner critic, not just in my work, but in life too. How we feel there's another inner voice in us that's, mean, sad, all these parts of us that we think there's something wrong with us. So think Inside Out for adults. At some point, basically, these little personalities pop up as we age. And at some point, whether, something traumatic happened, or we live in a society, or things that you've heard in society, stories or standards or expectations or fears that you've kind of internalized from the outside, at some point your part, like one of your parts, or maybe a couple of them, reacted to that, and they kind of become almost like parentified children. So what I mean is like something may have happened in the same way that if a child's like in an abusive family, that child may like grow up quicker and learn to, let's say, like keep their emotions to themselves, not express them, because maybe in an abusive household, they've learned that it's safer and it protects them to keep everything inside. But then like once these parentified children grow up and they're not in that situation anymore, they don't need that mechanism to survive. And so it actually can become like a crutch or a hindrance in future relationships that you get into, that you can't express your boundaries, emotions, feelings in a healthy way, and you just keep them inside. And so that's where the need to like address those parts in you. And so at some point, I think all of us have an inner critic, not necessarily because something traumatic happened to us, but even just like society and expectations, especially in like a social media driven capitalist society, a lot of external pressure to be productive with our creative work. And it's like these parts in us will take on the critic that we think will protect us. So, and it's not like it came from someone like severely critiquing our work or like bashing on it. It could just be like, you know, when we see on Instagram, this person has been working like this hard, we're published in these magazines and have these galleries and working really hard and having these perfect images thrown at us of other people's creative successes, careers, and work. And so our minds sort of rationalize that and think we need to be more strict on ourselves and have higher standards if we want to get to that level. And so that can manifest as a severe, harsh inner critic. And so mine definitely has come out, I think, because of social media, especially feeling like there's other people my same age, like doing all these amazing things, like they're already published, they're already this, that. And I just think to myself, well, like, I'll never be as good as them. Or like a part in me has internalized that as to thinking like that's not possible for me. And the only way it can be possible is if I am very critical with myself. And I'm not saying feedback or critiques are bad. I'm not saying that. There is a time and place for them. And I feel like it must be balanced, though, with positive feedback, because no one responds to being yelled at. Like, truly. Like, if you're at a grocery store and someone's going slow, they're not going to go faster just because you yell at them. And I think that's similar. Like, we're not going to keep making just because we yell at them. People don't generally want to respond positively to that kind of reaction. So it would make sense that I have this inner critic. So this piece is kind of depicting what Dr. Schwartz talks about, like a sort of like inner clove in our mind. So like think of the sort of consciousnesses in your mind as like a bunch of groups of like little characters. Think of like how everyone has their distinct personalities and helping them like get along, and conflict resolution between them is kind of what the healing work of IFS is about. And sometimes there's like a group of related personalities, maybe because they came about around the same time, from the same traumatic event, or from the same idea or thought or story we're telling ourselves. So this clove is particularly about my harsh critic. This character here, she is kind of like the protector of this little lizard guy and these two masked people, these two masks. So she is the type to just want everyone to just like kind of be quiet and stay in their role, so the inner harsh critic doesn't, like get on their radar and be attacked, basically. And then these two masks, like two sides of one being, is someone who, like, the part of me that pretends that everything's okay, and then the other part that wants to just melt down and cry. And so it's like two extremes that always kind of fight with each other, but are also attached to each other. And then this little lizard dude's kind of like my anxiety. And if anyone knows me, they know that when I'm anxious, I like bite the skin around my fingers. It used to be nail biting and I upgraded to skin. When I'm anxious and feeling very anxious about being perceived or what people perceive about me. So he has like a bunch of eyes looking out all over around him. And he kind of bit off his own tail. When I think of them as parts too, that at some point that were born out of me trying to protect myself, I can approach them with more compassion and remember that they were just trying to help. So then this big, I'll try to make them look like organs. This like kind of force is like my inner critic. When I thought about my inner critic, I thought of them as like this being that has everything backwards. And So it's like organs are on the outside and we don't even see its main body, and its heart is down here and very small and detached from everything. And that's why it lashes out. And then like these two like sort of globules being the forces that kind of directly fuel this dynamic up here with the girl. But there is still like deep inside playfulness that's alive. Not exactly important to the tips part, but I also just like sharing what I'm working on. I want to do more like details along the like organs and just kind of have fun with like textures. And I know I said I tried to stay off Pinterest, but I saw these pictures and artists. I really want to do something like that and try it out for the first time. So we're going to talk about that as I talk about like things that I learned and things I do to help, combat my inner critic. That book, No Bad Parts, is a good way, not just for, our mind for everyday life, but also our creative process to think about, where like things like creative block, our inner critic, things that we kind of antagonize and think that are a hindrance to our creative process, but how we can look at them as tools in disguise, of teachers in disguise, of how we can come to them with an open mind to see if they're trying to teach us and tell us something. Because there's like more research coming out, and I've like read in this other book, I'm learning more about like my menstrual cycle and how women's bodies work, that things like depression and anxiety, of course, like over heightened in this day and age, and not healthy for the chronic amount that everyone has, but advantages we've adapted that weren't meant to help us survive. So like when you're depressed, your body telling you something's not right in this environment. And like, no duh. I think we forget our bodies have a lot of wisdom and knowledge in themselves. So things like intuition, our inner voices, blockages, anxiety, fears, like they come from real places. And I think it's worth addressing them rather than discounting them or antagonizing them immediately. And I'm still working on that too. And this video is for me too, to remember it, just like my last like long talking video. So tip number 1 I have is my first tip is to make a reminder about what your goals are in your creative process. After graduating and meeting a bunch of people, like old and just newer graduates around my age too, about like, what they've done with their creative degree, if they did go to school. And a lot of people have done a lot of different things, a lot related and some unrelated to a creative field directly, like maybe adjacent, like media management, publishing. A big theme I was getting from a lot of it was they had to work really hard for what they got in the creative world. Okay, like no duh. Just hearing their stories, and I'm sure they had to sacrifice a lot to make that happen. Like just yesterday I met this woman who has published like over 200 kids' books, but I was surprised to see that she still has a lot of joy for just making, and it really shows, in how she carried herself and how she was just curious about everyone's work and was just delighted by the smallest things. I was at like this event where we were doing monotypes. But it made me think about like, in that moment they decided that's what they wanted. It's really important that you solidify for yourself what your creative goals are. And they don't have to be career-based. They don't have to be achievement, externally validating achievement-based. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that either. When we think of like a creative career, it doesn't necessarily have to just be in the public sphere. A creative career is a creative practice. It's a lifelong practice. And so if we think of it in that way, what are your creative career goals? How do you want creativity to be integrated in your life at this time? You don't need to think about for the rest of your life. And so right now for me, my ethos is, ever since I graduated, I've only really done creativity and work for other people, or like for the sake of deadlines and to produce with the mindset of having a job. Undergrad and as I was a media marketing person, I've been a ceramics instructor, I've been a studio manager for an architect. Not to say that there weren't parts that I enjoyed about that or learned about myself, but they were always in service of someone else's practice. And so right now my creative ethos is just wanting to get into a habit of loving my creativity back into prosperity, because I think a lot of it was almost suffocated by thinking of my creativity as something to get me to a financial or a professional goal. And for me, that stifled my creativity. That's when my inner critic went wild of like, no one will ever give you a job if you have this, like that just looks ugly. Like, why are you even trying? Have you seen like these people? And I was comparing myself to people like 20 years in the field, like whatever. And then also forgetting that a lot of what job career stuff in the creative field has to do is knowing the right people. And when your preparation meets that opportunity, luck, and chance, like no one tells you how much luck, chance, and connections is both in jobs and in the creative field, especially with jobs. And I just didn't realize that also being a new graduate. So thinking of my creativity as something that I needed to capitalize on now and make part of my career and my life was just so suffocating that I never wanted to work on anything. So right now, my creative ethos, and I have it written here, is about celebrating it, exploring it, and not controlling or exploring and criticizing it right now. And there's a time and a place, if you want to make creativity your bread and butter for, your livelihood, to have to change things, to have to take critiques and make changes based on someone else's views and opinions, wants for a client, whatever. But right now, I want to build up that curiosity and sort of like free-flowing love and acceptance I had for my creativity before I ever went to school for it. Like when I was in like middle school or like elementary, because I remember being so excited about being an artist. And maybe that is just part of growing up, that, that magic kind of goes away. But I'd like to at least try right now, that's my priority, to bring that back, to bring some of that joy back, because I think that's possible. I've met some people some people like later in their careers or who've like been practicing for like 20, 30 years who still have, that love deep inside. And I think I do too. And I'd like to find her again. To sort of remember that, that priority of why am I even making, kind of leads me to the next point. I have it like pasted here, like a sort of mantra, right next to where I'm working. And this is kind of a different place just because this is so big, I couldn't like have it by my desk. In my periphery, I always see it. It's like an affirmation. And I know that sounds really cheesy, and I have never really done that, to like writing a little note and pasting it like on my mirror or like in my creative space. I've never tried that before until like, my therapist suggested it. I was like, why not? I haven't tried it. And I really think environment matters. That brings me to my next point. It really matters the kind of environment that you create for yourself, the kind of people you surround yourself with, the kind of safe space. And I know it is a privilege to have enough space, resources, to have like your own little corner for art. But even like this whole like place that I'm sitting at is just like a wall that's not even my height and like maybe like 3 feet out. Like it can be as small as this. And I have like just like a bucket of some pens. And that's really all you may need depending on your setup, But I'm also an advocate of accessible art and like not wanting to make it too complicated with the materials. But I have this sort of mantra pasted here, and I'll read it. It says, "Your creativity is something to be loved, celebrated, and explored, not to be controlled, exploited, and criticized. Approach with curiosity, love, and acceptance." I've noticed since I posted it, actually, this has only been a week. I've noticed since I posted it, though, it has been easier to work on this. It did help that, like, I had the sketch kind of figured out more. But even when I was working on the sketch, I was still working on it when I first posted this. When I tried something new or made a mark that usually my critic would hop on, or I would hate, or I just didn't like how that looked, instead of just, like, letting my critic go crazy, jump on every perceived mistake that I was making, even just having that in my periphery just reminded me that, like, that's not why we're doing this. So just, like, take a second and stop and, like, it's okay. You were literally just by yourself drawing. No one's watching. You are safe. You're fine. You can make that line and who cares? And also some of the best artists that I know, like, at least the creatives I look up to, they're not afraid to, like, try new things. And they're just curious whenever they make, a mistake. Besides this mantra, I mean, this is part of like a sketch of the girl that I transferred. But I don't know, it's kind of cool. I feel like it kind of, I don't know, it helps like curate the vibe. I also have these 2 images here. This one was at this recent event I went to for this artist group. And it was just like a monotype party. And it was like all are welcome. And I showed up and it was just like a bunch of older artists. But besides age, like I just think like older people are more settled in themselves. Older artists are so cool to talk to because They were more settled in themselves. They were more confident. They've been through more shit, had more rejection. And they still, if they're still creating at this age, you know they have like a love for art that they have preserved through the years. So I just really look up to that. And so when I was like talking with them, they were just super welcoming of me wanting to like join their community and their events, and just hearing from their experiences, you know, kind of like all they've accomplished, but at the same time, just watching them get excited when one of them made a certain mark like this, or they're like, oh, I just tried out this new texture, and then the other like hyping them up about it. Like, you can tell these people love art, love each other, and love the community of just creation. And so this was like a piece that I made there just at the mono, and I was just like, the whole time I was like a little like nervous because I've done printmaking and monotypes only once, but it's not like my main thing. I'm not like an expert at it or that good. Who needs that label, actually? Who cares if I'm good? So I was kind of nervous because these were people who've been doing these monotypes for like 30, 40 years. Like, printmaking is their thing. And I was just kind of intuitively making lines and marks, and they were just super supportive. And I felt very like safe in that space. So that's why that's here. Oh my God. So that's why that's here. And then this card too is from one of the artists. He gave me his business card with one of his sketches. It's beautiful. He takes a lot of inspiration from like his daily walks and just his environment. He lives in Rhode Island. And it was really cool talking with him. And he showed me like his sketchbook, and he does like oh my God, I'm not really working on this. I'm mostly just talking. He does like a sketchbook, a daily practice sketchbook. And he showed me the sketch he did that morning. And he was like, yeah, I was just like waiting in my car. Oh, I have alarms for water because I don't drink enough water. He showed me a sketch from that morning during this event, and then he said, and then there's like a blank box on the next page, and he was like, this is for tomorrow. He says he like sketches like basically every day in his sketchbook, and he showed me his portfolio. It was so wholesome. It was like, he was so excited, like it was show and tell, and you can just tell he loved his work and loved sharing it, and it was beautiful work. A lot of landscape monotypes, etchings. And I asked him, like, how do you get in that habit of like a daily practice like that, where he's just so playful about it and just looking forward to it? And he was saying it took a while, but he just literally had a sketchbook with him all the time. And he was like, you basically just don't give yourself a choice. And I have my pencils in my pocket right here all the time. And then my sketchbook's really small, so there's no excuse why I can't take it with me. It's always with me. So if I have a free moment like on the bus, or he will just pull out a sketchbook. And he was like, and if you do that habit enough times, what comes out on the paper, you just don't care about. It's just about doing it. It reminded me of like another video I saw. Similarly, this guy, he's a photographer, videographer on YouTube, and he was saying he was talking with his other friend who's a photographer, and how he has a daily practice too. When he goes on walks, he always brings his camera. And by bringing, he doesn't mean like in his bag. He means like in his, like around his neck, ready. So if he just sees something, he just like takes a picture. And I think like having an environment where it's the least amount of resistance to get you to be creative doesn't give your inner critic enough time to sort of be like, oh no, but it has to look like this. No, that's not proper, or whatever. That whatever sort of excuses that your inner critic may come up with for you not to be creative that day, not to make something because you're doing it wrong way, whatever. Having your environment set up in such a way, whether that's on the go or it's like if you have your painting set up, having the paints already set up so it's just a matter of you sitting down and picking up that brush to put the paint on there. I think there's a lot of little habits like that can really make it easier for you to start creating, and then once you have that habit, your inner critic doesn't see it as like a warning signal when you sit down to create, rather just like a habit, like breathing. Yeah, and I just think the ease and the accessibility and the affordability of materials is way more important than how fancy they are or the best or whatever. Brings me to my next tip, point, thing is to give yourself some transition time. Like a lot of times we're like juggling other things, whether that's other creative, professional things or responsibilities, if like our job or 9 to 5 or whatever, to kind of switch over and go into creative mode for yourself or for your own personal work or another project you want to work on. It takes time. And I think grind culture and capitalism has primed us to think that it's just like normal, and we can, because with COVID, being able to have everything online, I should just be able to close this tab and open up another and do another assignment. No, our brain can't just like close one tab in a thought process and open up another. Like we have to do something to sort of like I think, transition and sort of prompt our brain that, oh, it's time to get creative. It's almost like telling the critic, like, hey, you don't need to be here. You can take a break, dog. And I know it kind of goes against the point I just made about like having everything set up and ready so you could just go into it. But even if it's just like a tiny cue or ritual that you do to like focus your intention to be creative, I think that can help instituting a daily habit and to get yourself to be creative, because then maybe you make it so it's something fun and you look forward to. So like certain music, it's like the one part of your day where you play your music out loud and you like dance and shake it out and stretch or do something before, or just sitting alone or meditating before you start, or reading a little bit of a book that you've been wanting to read. It's just little stuff like that that I think can signal to our brain that, no, creative time, that's my time. And I want it to be special. And I want to show my creative self and that time that you are special and that I'm going to treat you. The inner critic is stressed the fuck out. So if we could do something like draw it a hot bath, like give it its favorite little treat, like a little snack to occupy it before we sit down to draw, you know, I think he'd be a lot nicer. Just saying. Next tip would be in a similar vein of taking care of this inner critic and not rewarding it for the mean things it says, but also to just let it rest. So I think it's, and I said this earlier, I think too, with the other like Artist Way book thing, is to give your inner critic a rest, like genuinely treat it. Because if we think about it, where our inner critic comes from, they came from a very exhausted place. More likely than not, the inner critic came from feeling not good enough and wanting to overcompensate for that feeling of not feeling good enough with extra hard work, through good work, whatever, praise, and this sort of anxious idea and thought process that we need to just like work harder to achieve the things that we feel lacking in. If we have compassion and think of our inner critic like that, that's a very exhausting state to be in. And I don't mean just taking breaks for the sake of, for you to rest up, to be more productive in a second. And I'm having trouble with this too. I think anyone who grew up with capitalism finds it really hard to genuinely relax. I know a lot of people don't like to think about this. We are still monkeys. We are still animals. And animals need rest. Like when we see like some sort of like animal in the animal kingdom get like beat up or something, or get like abandoned by their flock, we think, oh yeah, like, oh poor baby, like she needs care. But like when it happens to us, we're just like, suck it up. And the inner critic may tell us we need to like keep working, you gotta get better, we gotta like maximize our free time to get better at this skill. That's also just capitalism, baby. We've been lied to. We do not need to be this stressed out. Okay, when I think, and I was just having this conversation with my partner like 10 minutes ago. Okay, it's longer than 10. I've been talking for so fucking long. That if you think about how like artists used to be housed and how they used to live like back in the old days, and I mean like 1800s forward, who knows, like both in the Western and like Eastern world, that's mostly like the kind of art worlds I've studied. Like these artists would be housed, like fed and housed for however like days or weeks it takes for them to do their commission. Like there would be like traveling artists who would do that. Like they would just like have their subject like sit for the painting for a couple hours, and then we all take a break and go on with our lives. And then like, yeah, this is gonna take a while because paintings like that take a while, so that's why they would live in sometimes. Like they would get paid to be people's muses and be supported. And yeah, oh my god, the second clap. Okay, that scared the shit out of me. Some guy came to sell me Wi-Fi. How'd you get in this building? Yeah, people would be like live-in traveling artists and have like their housing and stuff all covered. And that just doesn't exist in the United States, first of all. There's like no artist apprenticeships, pretty much. Trust me, I've tried. Unless they're like in almost like a class format that you pay for. We just don't believe in investing in an artist as a person anymore, it feels like. There are apprenticeships like not in America that I've seen because they actually value knowledge of craft and skills to live on. It's not just about the product, it's about the knowledge and the skill. It just like still so baffles me with like Hokusai, who made The Wave. He has such like an iconic piece and an iconic era. He's like a household name, like The Wave is, like it's iconic. Like everyone knows, even if they don't know the artist. But he was still a whole person who lived his whole life, and he did so many other things leading up to that. Like if he had gone through his whole life thinking, I have to make the most iconic like print ever, or my life will be like nothing. And maybe he did, who knows? He was like an apprentice since he was 12, had so many different styles, but he's only just like known for one. And I think like we forget that he had a whole life before this like iconic, because he made it when he was like 70, 80, before this iconic wave over Kanagawa image. That I think we put pressure on ourselves, our inner critic does, because of capitalism, that we have to produce, we have to make the image, the best thing. It's just, I really think in the modern age like that with social media, it's just not natural for artists to work like that. Like now you hear, if you're going to be a published like illustrator or author, that you do your own marketing now. Or like even on application I've been seeing, they ask like for agents and stuff, like how's your social media following? And it's like even like these publishing houses don't want to help you market unless you're already a known, established entity that can give them profit. It's not like, I believe in your work and I can see the potential, so I want to support you. It's like, I see you can help me make money, so I'll help you make money. That's the only reason why I'm going to help you. And maybe I'm being pessimistic about it, and I'm sure there are pockets of like communities that actually are, and like businesses that want to actually support artists, but so much of it is profit driven and capitalism. It has completely warped our inner critic and our views of how we should be using our creativity. What is creativity used for if not to connect to people? And why do we need to spend thousands of dollars to do it? Why do we have to pay to go to a museum to do that? Why is it that only galleries are for, I only see upper middle class people there, or like super rich people? Because it's a money thing now. It's become very, and I'm very passionate about this. And if anyone has anything contrary to anything that I'm saying, please share like in the comments or anything, like your experience, because I would just genuinely like to know. And I think sharing more of our varied experiences helps us to not feel alone. Instead of feeling like everyone's going out being successful, this is the norm, I'm the weird one, I'm the odd one out, I'm the loser. That's what our inner critic tells us. Which I guess that I didn't have it planned for this one, but which I guess brings me to my next point, is like creating community is really important. And I'm still working on that. Right now I'm kind of like in a transitional time where I'm not sure exactly geographically, first of all, where I want that community. But I am realizing even no matter where I am, I can find, pockets of community in people that are kind, that are creatives. Because our inner critic thrives when we're alone, having a community to support you in your creative endeavors is really important. I don't just mean like friends and family. That's very important too. Like to have friends and family, even if they're not creative, in the creative field is really important. Just because we all need support. We all need breaks. We all need people, outside our own bubble and our echo chambers. Having creative community is really important to sort of silence and appease that inner critic. Because we're just like sitting alone in our studio thinking like this is a piece of crap. But to have another creative to like give us true feedback because they care about us, to take our work seriously, to have someone to support that too, and to like share that same sort of love makes us feel like our creativity is meant to be shared. It's more than just something that I'm controlling to make money out of, or to get a reward, or to have success, or whatever. Even if it's just someone you can another artist, you can just here's what I'm working on. Just to have a group or another friend to just be like, this is what I'm working on. What are you working on? For someone else to be excited and from a creative background that knows probably the time and the hard work and the love and the connection you have with your work. And to have someone who appreciates that with their own experience of being a creative, to appreciate that is really important. And I know those pockets are hard to find, especially ones that are free too. I'm not talking about ones where you gotta pay to go to classes. And I think another thing to address your critic is to make time to actually ask your critic, hey, what's going on? Why are you saying this now? What just happened to make you respond that way? To so violently or intensely come back with that criticism or mean thing that you're telling yourself? Because a lot of times we don't know where the origin of that voice is coming from. Is it coming from me? Is it coming from others? Did someone say something? Someone react a certain way? Is it coming from society? Do I feel a pressure from something? Do I have expectations placed on me by my family, by society? Something. It's knowing what is me and what is something else. What do I want to take and what do I want to let go? If it is coming from you, Where did you internalize that? What happened that made you think that, oh, I have to be this way now, or like my art has to change this way so I can get this to happen? So like, for example, is this uneasy feeling trying to tell me that maybe I'm in the wrong environment, like I don't have enough support? Because maybe under all that mean criticism that my inner critic is throwing at me, maybe my inner critic's incredibly lonely. Maybe my inner critic wishes they had, like, they, as a ceramicist or something, for example. Maybe they wish they had more people who love ceramics like they do. Maybe your inner critic is just like exhausted. Maybe they're hungry. And if you approach it like kind of like IFS as like another parentified child, a part of you, another being inside of you that is acting out in this way to try to protect you, maybe then ask it, what do they need right now? Where in them is this hurt coming from? Because you don't just come out of the womb spouting mean criticism unless you're Kanye. You don't come out of the womb already just so hypercritical of yourself and your work. That's not how that works. Like kids, you see kids draw, they don't give a fuck what it looks like. They just draw whatever they want. And then they'll be like, they like draw the most fuck-ass looking like horse character, like, that's you, daddy. And they don't care. They're like, no, you just couldn't see it. That's the kind of confidence that we need to have. And so we had to wonder, where did that harsh criticism come, where we told ourselves that this is wrong, not that way? And it comes from somewhere. It comes from us, comes from outside of us. It comes as we grow up. So like finding that source and maybe what happened at that time that made you start thinking about that prompted you to think of yourself and of your creative practice this way, will be like a good first start to ask yourself, okay, so whatever happened to me then, how can I heal that part so I don't have to be so mean to myself? Has that part felt neglected, unheard? So it tries to like hijack the system, so to speak, and like nitpick everything because it doesn't feel heard. Maybe your inner critic was actually the child who fell in love with art to begin with, and they just feel very neglected that you haven't let them freely create. And so they will like criticize everything you do if it's like all this like client work that you truly don't care about. Maybe it's telling you like your creative efforts are not fulfilling you, or whatever you're doing in your life. All these warning systems, anxieties, depression, anything, like these are systems put in place by our body to tell us that something's up and we gotta change something. And I think we need to approach it with like listening instead of pathologizing judgment and fear around, why am I feeling this way? Like this must be wrong. I just want it to go away. That's kind of all I have. I didn't really work on this. This kind of happened last time, but she's coming along. I'm trying to think about like what I should do in this part. If I should outline it. I think I should. It kind of looks a little weird. But yeah, I'll keep updating you on this. Looking forward to what this is going to look like. But let me know if you guys have any other tips from your experience too about dealing with harsh criticism, whether externally or from yourself, and how you work through that. And because we're all here to help each other and support each other to heal our creative journey, heal on our creative journey. Keep working on it, check in with yourself, take rest, and remember that it's never too late to create. Okay, bye.
나의 맘에 조금씩 자리 잡은 널 느낄 때면 괜히 잠을 설치고 괜한 이유로 내게 연락해 매번 같은 실수를 반복해 이런 마음이 익숙지 않아 끝없이 생각에 빠져 허우적거릴 뿐이야 Why don't you make me smile? Why don't you tell me your heart? 이